What happens when a Hollywood legend sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to face disrespect so shocking that he does the unthinkable on live television? In just 31 seconds, one careless comment turned a friendly chat into the most uncomfortable moment in late-night history. Jimmy Kimmel's studio was packed that night. The audience buzzed with excitement. They were about to see Clint Eastwood, one of the greatest actors and directors of all time. This was supposed to be a celebration. Clint had a new film coming out, and everyone wanted to hear his stories. The lights dimmed. The band played. Jimmy walked out with his usual confident smile, waving to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a real treat for you tonight," Jimmy said, his voice echoing through the studio. "A man who needs no introduction, an icon, a legend. Please welcome Clint Eastwood." The audience erupted. Clint walked out slowly, wearing a simple dark jacket and jeans. He had that calm, steady presence that made him who he was. He shook Jimmy's hand and sat down. The interview started off fine. They talked about movies. They talked about directing. Clint was relaxed, answering questions with his trademark quiet confidence. "So, Clint, you've been making films for decades now," Jimmy said, leaning back in his chair. "Tell us about this new project. What made you want to tell this story?" Clint nodded. "Well, it's about real people, real struggles. I've always been drawn to stories that show what people are capable of when they're pushed to their limits. This one felt important." The audience clapped. Everything seemed normal, but something was shifting in Jimmy's tone. His questions started to take a different turn. "You know, Clint, you're getting up there in age," Jimmy said with a slight smirk. "Do you ever think about slowing down, maybe letting the younger generation take over?" The audience went quiet. It was an odd question. Clint raised an eyebrow, but kept his. "Cool. Age is just a number," Clint replied calmly. "I'll keep working as long as I have something to say. That's what artists do." Jimmy laughed. But it wasn't a friendly laugh. Sure. But I mean, come on. You're what, 90-something? Don't you think it's time to pass the torch? Let someone with fresh ideas take the spotlight?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was something else. Clint's face remained neutral, but you could see it in his eyes. He wasn't pleased. "I don't think creativity has an expiration date," Clint said, his voice steady but firm. "Some of the best work comes from people with experience, with wisdom." Jimmy waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, experience. But let's be honest, the industry has changed. Your kind of movie making, it's kind of old-fashioned, isn't it? I mean, nobody makes westerns anymore. Nobody cares about those slow, quiet films." The audience gasped. You could feel the tension building. Clint sat up a little straighter. His jaw tightened. "My kind of movie making?" Clint repeated, his voice low. "And what kind is that?" Jimmy shrugged, clearly enjoying himself. "You know, the whole strong, silent type thing, the tough guy act. It's outdated. Today's audiences want something different. They want diversity. They want excitement, not some guy squinting into the sunset." That was the line. That was the moment things went too far. Clint's expression darkened. He stared at Jimmy for a long moment, and the entire studio fell silent. You could hear people breathing. The cameras kept rolling. "I see," Clint said quietly. "So you invited me here to insult my life's work?" Jimmy laughed nervously. "Oh, come on, Clint. Don't be so sensitive. I'm just messing around. This is what we do. It's comedy." "Comedy?" Clint said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "There's nothing funny about disrespecting someone who's been doing this longer than you've been alive." The audience didn't know how to react. Some people clapped. Others sat frozen. Jimmy's smile faded. He realized he'd made a mistake. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Jimmy said, his tone defensive now. "Your movies are fine, but they're not exactly setting the world on fire anymore. Maybe it's time to accept that and step aside gracefully." Clint stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. He reached up and unclipped his microphone. The sound echoed through the studio. Everyone watched in disbelief. "What are you doing?" Jimmy asked, his voice rising. "Clint, sit down. We're in the middle of the show." Clint looked down at Jimmy. His face was calm, but his eyes were ice cold. "I don't sit and listen to disrespect. Not from you. Not from anyone." "Oh, so you're just gonna walk off?" Jimmy said, standing up now too. His voice was getting louder. "Real mature, Clint. Real professional. You can't handle a little criticism?" Clint placed the microphone on his chair. He didn't rush. He didn't storm off. He simply turned toward the exit. "This isn't criticism," Clint said, his back to Jimmy. This is you trying to make yourself feel important by tearing down someone who's actually earned their place. I've got no time for that." Jimmy's face turned red. The audience was completely silent now. The crew didn't know whether to keep filming or cut to commercial. Jimmy took a step toward Clint. "You know what?" Jimmy shouted. "Fine, walk off. Show everyone what a baby you are. You can't take the heat? Then get out." Clint stopped. He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at Jimmy from the corner of his eye. "The heat?" Clint said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow heard by everyone. "I've faced down criticism from people who actually matter. From real filmmakers, real critics. You're a talk show host who reads jokes off a card. Don't confuse the two." The audience gasped again. Some people started clapping. Others sat there with their mouths open. Jimmy stood there, speechless. For the first time all night, he had nothing to say. Clint walked toward the exit. The cameras followed him. You could see his silhouette moving through the backstage area. Jimmy finally found his voice. "Well, there you have it, folks," Jimmy said, trying to sound casual but failing. "Clint Eastwood, everyone, a real professional." But nobody was laughing. The audience wasn't on Jimmy's side. They were uncomfortable. They just watched a legend get insulted and disrespected. And they'd watched him handle it with more grace than the host ever could. Clint pushed through the backstage door and disappeared into the hallway. A production assistant ran after him. "Mr. Eastwood, please," the assistant said, nearly tripping over cables. "Can we talk about this?" Clint didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. "There's nothing to talk about," he said. "I came here to promote a film, not to be someone's punching bag." "But the interview," the assistant pleaded. "We still have 15 minutes left. The network is going to be furious." Clint finally stopped walking. He turned to face the young assistant, and his expression softened just a bit. "That's not my problem. Your boss decided to make this personal. I don't play those games." The assistant nodded, defeated. Clint continued walking until he reached the exit door. He pushed it open, and the cool night air hit his face. Behind him, he could still hear the chaos in the studio, producers yelling, Jimmy trying to salvage the show, audience members whispering to each other. Back on stage, Jimmy tried to move on. He brought out his next guest, but the energy was gone. The audience was still processing what they'd just seen. Social media was already exploding. Clips of the confrontation were being shared everywhere. People were taking sides. Most of them were on Clint's side. The thing about respect is that you can't demand it. You earn it. And Clint Eastwood had earned it over decades of incredible work. Jimmy, in his arrogance, thought he could take shots at a legend and get away with it. He thought his platform gave him that right, but he was wrong. What Jimmy didn't understand was that there's a difference between playful teasing and genuine disrespect. There's a line, and he crossed it. He questioned Clint's relevance. He mocked his style. He suggested that Clint's entire career was outdated and meaningless. And he did it all with a smug smile, as if he was doing Clint a favor by having him on the show. But Clint didn't need Jimmy's show. He never did. He came as a courtesy, as a professional. And when that courtesy wasn't returned, he exercised his right to leave. The walk-off became instant news. Every entertainment outlet covered it. Every blog, every podcast. And the more people watched the clip, the more they sided with Clint. They saw a man who refused to tolerate being treated poorly. They saw dignity in action. Jimmy tried to defend himself later. He claimed it was all in good fun. He said Clint was being too sensitive, but those excuses fell flat. The video didn't lie. Anyone could watch it and see exactly what happened. They could see the disrespect. They could see Jimmy's attitude. And they could see Clint's measured, dignified response. There's a lesson in that moment. A lesson about how you treat people. About respect. About understanding that someone's legacy isn't something you get to mock just because you have a microphone and an audience. Clint Eastwood had nothing to prove. He'd already proven everything over a career spanning generations. What happened that night wasn't about a celebrity being difficult. It wasn't about someone having a bad day. It was about a line being crossed, and someone having enough self-respect to walk away rather than sit there and take it. In the green room earlier that evening, before the interview started, Clint had been friendly. He'd shaken hands with the crew. He'd joked with the makeup artist. He was the picture of professionalism. One camera operator later said he'd been hoping to get Clint's autograph after the show. That didn't happen. When Clint walked onto that stage, he had no idea what was coming. He expected a normal interview, the kind he'd done hundreds of times before. Talk about the movie, share a few stories, thank the host, wave goodbye. Simple. But Jimmy had other plans. Maybe he thought being edgy would make him look cool. Maybe he thought taking shots at a legend would make him seem bold. Whatever his reasoning, it backfired spectacularly. The questions started innocent enough. Tell us about the film. What was it like working with this actor? Standard stuff. But then the tone shifted. The questions became pointed. They became personal. And they became insulting. Don't you think you're too old for this? Jimmy had asked at one point, before the worst of it. Clint had laughed it off then. I'll stop when I'm dead, he'd replied, and the audience had cheered. But Jimmy kept pushing. What about the rumors that you're difficult to work with? Jimmy asked next. That you're stuck in your ways? Clint's smile had faded then. I'm particular about quality, he'd said. If that makes me difficult, so be it. The audience had clapped again, but Jimmy wasn't done. He kept going, kept pushing. It was as if he wanted to get a reaction, and eventually he got one, just not the one he wanted. When Clint mentioned real people and real struggles in his films, Jimmy had scoffed, actually scoffed, on camera. Real struggles? He'd said. Like what, cowboys and outlaws? Come on, Clint, that stuff is ancient history. That was when you could see Clint's patience wearing thin. His responses became shorter, more clipped. The warmth in his voice disappeared. He was still professional, still composed, but the friendliness was gone. And then came the final straw. The comment about his movie making being outdated, the suggestion that he should step aside, the mocking tone, the dismissive attitude. That was it. That was the moment Clint decided he'd had enough. Standing up and removing the microphone wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a dramatic gesture for attention. It was a quiet, powerful statement. It said, I don't have to sit here and listen to this. It said, my time is valuable, and I won't waste it on someone who doesn't respect me. It said everything without saying much at all. Jimmy's response revealed everything about his character. Instead of apologizing, he got defensive. Instead of acknowledging that he'd gone too far, he tried to blame Clint. You can't handle criticism, he'd said, as if what he'd been doing was legitimate criticism and not just rude, unprofessional commentary. The crew members later said the vibe backstage after Clint left was awful. Nobody knew what to do. The segment producers were panicking. The network executives were furious. And Jimmy was trying to play it off like everything was fine, even though it clearly wasn't. One of the writers later admitted that they'd warned Jimmy before the show. They told him to keep it respectful, to remember who he was talking to. But Jimmy had waved them off. He'd said he knew what he was doing, that he could handle it. Clearly, he couldn't. The thing about Clint Eastwood is that he's never been one for drama. He doesn't seek attention. He doesn't cause problems. He shows up, does his job, then goes home. That's how he's always been. So for him to walk off a show, it had to be serious. It had to be something that genuinely crossed a line. And it was. Jimmy's comments weren't just rude. They were designed to diminish, to belittle, to suggest that Clint's decades of work didn't matter anymore, that his contributions to cinema were irrelevant, that he should just fade away quietly. But Clint didn't become a legend by fading away. He didn't build a legacy by accepting disrespect, and he wasn't about to start. Now, no matter how big the platform or how loud the host. The walk through the backstage area was quiet. Clint didn't say a word to anyone. He didn't need to. His face said it all. Disappointment, frustration, but also dignity. Always dignity. When he reached his dressing room, he grabbed his jacket and left immediately. No goodbyes, no explanations, just out the door and into the night. His publicist scrambled to do damage control, but Clint told them not to bother. The video speaks for itself, he'd said, and he was right. Within hours, the clip had millions of views. People were breaking it down frame by frame. They were analyzing every word, every expression, and the consensus was clear. Jimmy had been out of line. Clint had been justified. End of story. Some people tried to defend Jimmy. They said he was just doing his job. That comedy requires pushing boundaries. But those arguments didn't hold water. There's a difference between pushing boundaries and being disrespectful. There's a difference between comedy and cruelty. What Jimmy did wasn't comedy. It was mean-spirited. It was designed to elevate himself by tearing someone else down. And it backfired because people saw through it. They recognized it for what it was. Clint's response, meanwhile, was praised universally. People respected him for walking away, for refusing to engage with someone who wasn't worth his time, for showing that you don't have to sit there and take abuse just because someone has a camera pointed at you. The entertainment industry took notice. Other celebrities started speaking out. Actors who'd worked with Clint shared stories about his professionalism. Directors praised his integrity. Even people who'd never met him expressed admiration for how he handled the situation. Jimmy, on the other hand, faced backlash. Viewers criticized him, sponsors questioned the show's direction, and other potential guests reportedly became more hesitant about appearing. Nobody wants to be the next person insulted on national television. The night ended with Clint back at his hotel, probably not thinking much about what had happened. He'd moved on, he had a film to promote, and he'd find other ways to do it, better ways, with people who actually respected him and his work. Jimmy ended the night trying to salvage his image, trying to explain, trying to justify, but the damage was done. The moment was captured forever, and no amount of spin could change what everyone had seen with their own eyes. That's the power of staying true to yourself, of knowing your worth, of refusing to compromise your dignity for anyone or anything. Clint Eastwood demonstrated all of that in just a few short minutes. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to argue. He simply stood up, removed his microphone, and walked away. And in doing so, he showed everyone watching what real strength looks like, what real class looks like, what real professionalism looks like. The interview that was supposed to celebrate a legend instead became a lesson in respect. A reminder that no matter how big your platform, no matter how bright the lights, you don't get to treat people poorly. You don't get to mock their life's work. You don't get to demand they sit there and smile while you insult them. Clint Eastwood didn't owe Jimmy Kimmel anything. He didn't owe him his time, his patience, or his tolerance for disrespect. And when it became clear that respect wasn't on the table, Clint made the only choice that made sense. He left. And in leaving, he won. Not because he wanted to win, but because he refused to lose his dignity. And that's something worth remembering. That's something worth respecting. That's the real story of what happened that night when a Hollywood legend walked off a talk show and reminded everyone what it means to stand up for yourself.